Good morning, everyone. Please be very welcome to this first panel. It's an honor to be here today on this first panel of the third day of the first edition of this political forum. So we have this very special European debate and the moment that I know how the students are looking for. And the question of these days, one of the questions of these days is the question of the debate, and is the Russia-China partnership, will it weaken or grow stronger? And to kick off, let me remember, as you probably remember, that the Beijing Winter Games started on 4th of February. And on that very same day, President Vladimir Putin visits President Xi Jinping. And on that day, Russia and the Federation of Russia and China signed a joint statement with the name of a joint statement on the international relations entering a new era and the global sustainable development. On this statement, they underline the Russia and China long-standing, and I quote, long-standing traditions of democracy, and that they stand, and I quote again, ready to work together with all the interested partners to promote genuine democracy. So the next chapter of this story we know, unfortunately know. The Winter Games ended on the 20th of February and the war started on 24th of February. But to proceed this debate, I will give the floor to our very good friend Hartmut Meyer. He is the European Studies Center Director at St. Anthony's College, Oxford, and he was acting director of the European, and now he is the executive chair of the European. And before his very prestigious career as academic in these areas of international relations and European studies, he was journalist. But what you probably don't know is that he was also, I think he is, a very keen football player that played for more than 20 years on for the St. Anthony's College on the Oxford MCR team. Is that right? So I will pass you the ball. I will pass you the ball because you are the right person to share this debate. Arthur, please.
And I don't know how to kick the ball into the net. Do I have to push a button?
No.
Do you give me the button? I'm fine. So thank you very much for that kind introduction. And indeed, I'm a keen footballer. And when I walked in yesterday, I ran into an old teammate who teaches at the institute, and we hugged each other, and we are partners in crime. We will bring the St. Anthony's football team to Portugal next year to play in old boys games. So I've done my job. I don't need to do anything anymore because my real commitment is to all the football teams of this world, but sometimes to students as well. And I'm really delighted to be here as the executive chair of the Europaeum, a network of 18 universities, and we have worked with the Institute and Cattolica for a long time, and we are proud to be here. This is your 30th event. We celebrate 30 years of our network later in September and October, so this is a long partnership and it thrives. And this debate is really what we are all about, the next generation. And it is bringing younger people into the debate, how to actually improve democracy, place democracies in the world order. And there couldn't be a better theme than what our hosts have chosen. Will the Russia-China relationship weaken or will it grow stronger? We have two excellent teams. We have Team Weaken with Maria Carolina, Nada, and Julian, and each team has a support team in the audience because every football team needs a few hooligans, and we have the intellectual hooligans in the audience who help their team against the other team. On the team Stronger, we have Maya, Fun, and Ramses making the case why it grows stronger. Let me try to explain the ground rules before we go full Monty into the action. We will have 5 minutes speakers, speaker 1, speaker 2 from each team. There are 2 ways of engaging with the speakers, and that is for our support teams. They can say point of information when they say it wasn't clear what you said and so on. And a point of information has to be taken by the speaker. But it then has to be a point of information rather than an attack on what they have said. If you want to attack what we have heard, it is calling for an intervention. With an intervention, the speaker can decide to accept that or not. And it's up to the speaker to allow that or not. After we have heard the first 2 speakers, we will have 2 experts responding to what they have heard, and that is Ines Domingos, and this is Jose Miguel Sadiqa, commenting not what they think and believe or what they think. It is commenting on what they have heard from the students. And after the experts respond, I open it up to the audience, and everyone can ask questions to the teams and saying, you argued this, what do you think, and so on, or you can say, I totally disagree. The third speaker then has to take into consideration what they have heard from the experts and from the audience, and then give it a full Monty in the third presentation. What we want to do is we want to ask first, before you have heard the debate, where are you leaning? Do you think, and we have 2 people helping us counting, do you think this partnership will weaken or it will grow stronger? And what we do after the debate, we have the same again and see whether your position has changed, i.e. whether the arguments made a difference, but you might be committed to a certain idea. And then in the third one, we'll say, I didn't change my mind, but we will ask you, which team do you think made the more convincing argument for the case that they were presented? I can say the students were semi-automatically allocated. It doesn't mean that if someone makes the case that they actually believe in that case. It is not that clear, but they have to make the case for the team that they're on. The rules, I seem clear. Now let me ask, who thinks that the relationship between China and Russia will grow stronger?
Podemos votar. We vote also?
I think we stay.
We don't vote.
We are influencers.
Exatamente. Embora eu acho que sim, que vai reforçar.
Quer dizer, há sempre
Okay.
mas tem que escolher uma ou outra.
Tendo que escolher, eu diria que sim. Com os dados que temos sobre.
What do we have? 70 think stronger. Weaken. About 30. About 30 think it will weaken. So there is a bit of an imbalance here. Team, address the audience, address the imbalance. So I call on Team Weaken and Maria Carolina to open the debate. And please come to the podium. You have 5 minutes to start making the case why this relationship will weaken. Maria Carolina.
Good morning. I'm going to make the first point. So we believe that the China-Russian relation will grow apart due to opposite strategies, divergent interests, ideological clashes, and international competition. Secondly, because of the current geopolitics dynamic that began with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its consequences that implicates other actors. I will clarify this last idea by presenting the first arguments. That is, the Russian invasion to Ukraine has economic consequences everywhere, but especially in Africa, that is going through a food crisis because of the impossible access to the cereals. Ukraine was the fourth biggest exporter of cereals globally. And in the beginning of the month, there was a meeting of the President of the African Union, Macky Sall, with Vladimir Putin, where he stated that Africa was a victim of the conflicts provoked by Putin, beginning a negative escalation of the more than 50-year-old relations between Africa and Russia, which was emphasized by Putin that did not respond to the food crisis. Both Russia and China are involved in this new scramble for Africa, and the Ukrainian conflict started by Russia 4 months ago is extremely beneficial for China. Because Russia almost poisoned the privileged relation itself. China had not made any efforts in that way. This fragilization of the Russian-African relations leaves China in a privileged situation with more leeway to impose its influence, as have been doing for the last years, as we all know, which in international relations and geopolitics, imposing influence translates to more power and ultimately more independence, and a more independent China is a China away from Russia. Elaborating on the opposite strategies, we see that China understands the current dynamic and plays the current, not liberal, of course, but they understand how to impose their soft power, how to use their soft power. They know how to play the game. They are growing its influence through economic investments, through technological financing. On the other hand, we have Russia that has no interest in participating in the system or playing by the rules, and it's still imposing its influence in the classic bellic way, as we have seen, and subjecting itself to every type of sanctions. China is the one that has more to gain from being part of the system, having benefited the most with the sea protection and strengthening relations with the EU countries, making strategic gains in a very meticulous way, like buying public debt, for example, the Portuguese. And in terms of economic dependence, even though China is still purchasing energy resources from Russia, being one of the biggest parts of their partnership, China is advancing in the energetic transition, and in the long term, these purchases will become less and less important. And also, currently, and since 2017, China is still exporting more foods than Russia, and it's another point for China in terms of independence and to be able to detach itself from Russia. Last point, I want to 1 minute. I want to clear that the Beijing distance to Moscow doesn't have to mean going to the opposite direction and playing against Kremlin, and it should not be in order to the gains from this relation, like the border security being kept. It should not mean that China plays against. Yes?
So my question is, do you really think China's aim is to be independent and be the sole actor? It doesn't need to align with someone?
Yes, I believe that they are closing themselves. We see that with COVID. We see that in terms of human rights. I believe that's their strategic interest, is their own interest to close themselves, to be independent.
You have to come to a close.
Sorry?
A final statement.
My final statement is that the distance from Beijing to Moscow does not have to mean going to the opposite side, and it should not be. It's just growing apart.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I call on Maya, the first speaker for Stronger.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be part of this debate and discuss this important motion on behalf of the proposition team. We just heard, again, unsurprisingly, the utmost emphasis on Ukraine, an episode of history. But let me illustrate it in a second. If we're discussing history, we can draw a pretty, I would say, long line, just to show the increase. Again, the opposition, what they did, again, unsurprisingly, is focusing on such a narrow point of history, just Ukraine crisis. What we have to show today is history. We want to show you a strong, substantial partnership of years between Russia and China, unliberal, perhaps, but here in this forum, we are calling for scholastic tolerance and acceptance of all regimes. Please.
If you want to talk about history, then great. In 2016, they made the same statement about having a monogamous partnership, and nothing changed. What do you say to that?
So please let me do my speech, and I'll be glad to give more arguments and respond and show you a bit more about history. But thank you for your wonderful question. So today, we will discuss history, but we are going to discuss authoritarian unity. Rather than challenge, we are seeing this as an opportunity to discuss the new world order and perhaps a new definition of political hegemony, something which is perhaps a bit less liberal, but should still be discussed. Our team today will prove that China-Russia relations will grow stronger on the short and long terms, exceeding the Ukraine war, which is substantial. But it's not the only thing we need to discuss today. We would like to show, again, that this history is more than instrumentalism, despite the fact that most of the countries, when we are judging them, they have geopolitical interests, and that's completely valid when we're seeing the scholarship. It should not be judged simply because we have non-liberal values at stake. To better frame this discussion, we spotted that this motion at stake is not questioning the necessity or morality of these relationships, but it's a predictive analytics. We're discussing what are the more likely settings for these partnerships to grow, and it will grow. And we have plenty of arguments which will be presented further on to prove this point. We are going to present the following arguments. First, non-liberal values can bring state actors together and should not be called instrumentalism. Second, historically, important, there has been a long-term substantial partnership of China and Russia, which cannot be judged only by the liberal lens. Many will superficially suggest that these relations will grow only on the short term due to the exceptional settings of the Ukraine war, leading to the alienation from the West. But is it really the case? The answer is not really. China and Russia share similar history and geopolitical values, a partnership of years, similar to our countries. This is not a static relationship, and yet so much in common. The only problem for, I would say, these countries in this global debate is the fact that they're not liberal. So it's harder to say why they actually align. So we will prove today, with the help of my wonderful colleagues, we will show the history. We will discuss all relevant points, not specific points of history as were mentioned by the motion. Please.
Is it on? Yeah. Who are you arguing with because our team hasn't mentioned anything about liberal values?
I'm saying broadly because I know a bit the history and what has been said about China and Russia. So, needless to say, the bias exists, even in your question, if I may suggest, and in this intervention, which are clearly needed, because this discussion is important. Thank you for the heads up, Honorary Chair. So beside the technological and economic importance, which unfortunately I cannot elaborate, and I'll have the assistance of Pan to further discuss, we will just summarize and say that this discussion here today is about showing the importance of such strong actors, the partnerships of them over years, trying to go outside of the usual traditional scholarships, trying to show that only liberal partnerships can grow together. We would like to show the partnership of strong non-liberal actors, based on common values. And we are calling for a tolerant and equal treatment of all values, whatever they are, since we are in a democratic place, and all values should be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call on the second speaker from Team Weekend, Nada.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'd just like to start by focusing on my colleague's point just now. The Russia-China relationships, or the partnership, as my partner described it to be, as a partnership of years, a partnership of a strong partnership, strong alliances, strong relationships, but it really has only been a brotherhood and humiliation against America throughout history. With the first Opium War, the Japanese war in China, the Sino-Soviet alliance collapsed not only because of extreme, Marxist alienations and different interpretations of what Marxism was, but only because of the fact that both nations are seeking the same level of power, and there's an extreme tip in the power balance. So I would completely disagree with that, and that's absolutely preposterous. They are not friends. They are not, chilling out, having coffee whenever they want to. Thanks.
So you're talking about the Soviet relationship. Considering the fact that we're talking about present times, what about the economic and political cooperation that we see now going between China and Russia?
Well, I would say that's only in the short term, because their interests lie more so in the short term than the long term. In the short term, Russia and China are working together because of their shared values in the way that they want to lead their nations. But as we all know, if Russia eventually does win this Ukraine war, that is a huge win for China, which can immediately go for Taiwan. But that's the short term. That's what they're looking at now, and that's what they're trying to get to now. But in the long term, it will collapse, just like the Sino-Soviet alliance did back in the Cold War, simply because of the fact that I just stated. They both want the same powers. They both want the same level of power, and it's an extremely unbalanced relationship. China is more expansionist. Russia is more imperialist. Those two ideologies don't coexist together, especially if one or the other are trying to tip each other. And the only way that they could possibly work together is through a shared interest in defeating America, which is what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to get, yes.
I just want to ask a question. How do you know that it is a short term or long term, while the fact shows that they are still holding hands strong until now?
Yeah. Well, okay, fair enough. I would say that for now, Russia is extremely self-dependent on its natural resources, but China is extremely desperate in having those resources for itself because it doesn't have those resources. In terms of economy, China can't support itself the same way that Russia does in terms of oil, natural gas, electricity, etc. China needs that, but China's economy is based more so on technology and technological advances that Russia is lacking in that area, and that's how they work together right now and have been working together right now. But back in the day, during the Cold War, it was China helping out Russia, and it was Russia helping out China with their advancements and their developments, because as we all know, China was extremely poor. It was extremely scarce. They had no resources at all, and they were in extreme poverty. Yes.
Isn't this proof of cooperation between these actors?
Yeah, in the short term, but that's my point.
Why
it's
not
only
in
in
the
the
long
short term,
term?
but in the long term, it's going to completely collapse.
Why?
But because of their based ideologies, they cannot coexist simply because there is one goal that they want to achieve: Russia with Ukraine. Yes, sir. Russia with Ukraine and China with Taiwan. Other than that, what else would they want? Yeah, of course. course.
So why would the partnership so beneficial economically and politically to both actors weaken, considering that these are not actors who necessarily base their relations with other actors on ideological grounds?
That's an extremely fair point, and my colleague in the next argument will go into more detail into that. But other than that, my final statement would just be that, you know, in terms of now, in terms of the future, you know, money talks, BS walks, and that's all I have to say about that. So thank you.
Thank you. I call on the second speaker of Team Stronger. Fan.
Thank you for having me here. We come here to present some factual information. We want to find out the truth instead of some wishful thinking that our opposition has mentioned. So I want to begin by saying that both Russia and China, what they pursue are national interests. They pursue their real politics. As we have seen yesterday with Professor Xiao Qiang, he said that China pursued legalism, which is the Chinese equivalent of Western Machiavellianism. They pursue national interests, and their national interests align together. They have a long borderline together. They share many things. The costs for conflict are higher, and the benefit of cooperation are much higher as well. And statistically, we see that in the last 20 years, Russia and China cooperation has risen 11% annually for the last 20 years. And in the last year, we see that it grew incredibly to a rate of 40%. Is there any trade relationship that grow on much? Yes.
Specifically, what kind of cooperation?
Trade relationship, they pursue economic interests, their national interests together. And going back to the history of national interest, they have a lot of history together. Until the last 100 years, both of them are a very long and recent monarchy. They have a legacy of communism together, although like Russia.
Point of intervention.
Yes.
You and your colleague focused on non-liberal values and, for example, even you mentioned national interests,
yes.
I guess, from a more realist perspective. So if we were to look at it from that, is it not true that you've ignored about 200 years of fighting over borderlands, the fact that Russia and China still have disputes over something as, I guess, important to Russia as Vladivostok and, yeah, I mean, just general bickering over the past
Very true, but
years.
is there any major power that have absolutely no conflict together? It's the grand scale of things that matters. Is how much we are talking about 40% rise in economic interest together. The living of them are dependent on each other, and they have a long common history together. They are, as I was saying, they have a communist legacy, and right now they are non-Western authoritarian system, and they have a common enemy together.
Intervention?
Yes.
You're talking a lot about the relationship between Russia and China, but I think it's also important to mention here Ukraine, as Ukraine is also a very important partner for China. So 30% of China's grain import, is from Ukraine. So what do you think is going to be the economical relationship between China and Ukraine in this regard?
Ukraine is, Ukraine is a relatively small country comparing to Russia. Like in terms of size, in terms of economic powers, in terms of most everything, Ukraine is not a small country, but comparatively, it is small in this relationship. And what I'm trying to say is that they pursue national interests together. They don't really need a treaty, an agreement to say that. They only need numbers. And we all know that treaties can go horribly wrong in history. We see that in the 2020 United Nations Security Council voting in response to the Russia-Ukraine war, China abstained from that vote. They did not say anything. But eventually, what they are saying, when they are saying nothing, they are showing tacit acknowledgement and tacit support toward the action of Russia right now. And we also see like a history of treaties and agreement can go horribly wrong. We have the history of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939 between Russia and a Western power, which is German back then. They promised not to fight each other. They promised brotherhood. And they end up killing each other on the battlefield. So does silence means that they'll grow apart? I don't think so. Yes, I will take this last one.
I'll make it. So you said that Russian and Chinese economic cooperation is increasing, but I think you forgot to mention that Russian agricultural imports don't even make up 10% of Brazilian and American agricultural imports to China.
Yes, but, well, agriculture is just one sector of the economy. We have trade, we have nuclear, we have military, we have everything. Okay, money talks. That's what I'm saying. They are doing the trade together. They are cooperating together. Money talks, and that is what you are saying too.
You have just a few seconds left, so you allow her to speak, or you have
No,
statement.
I will not. Money talks. That is what I'm saying. That's what my opposition are saying, but they are wishful thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the two first statements, and now each team has an expert to support them, to add arguments, to evaluate, and so on. And we start with our long friend, Ines Domingos, who supports the weekend team. Ines.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, and thank you for both sides' arguments. That was a very interesting debate. I would like to, I'm an economist, as my studies were in economics, so I tend to look at, as our friend was saying, to think money talks, and it is a little bit true. But I would like, with that, to go for the weak, to argue that this relationship will weaken on the basis of some economic arguments. So the reasons most people think that that relation will strengthen are that you need, Russia particularly short-term needs the support of China, that makes sense actually, and the long-term, the natural resources of Russia might be very helpful for China, which is of course a fast-growing country, and so that tends to be a big need for China. Now I would like to argue that that is not granted. We should not take this for granted. First, because in the long term, and I think that will happen all over the world, there is a tendency to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels, not only because it is, of course, better for the environment, and China has a problem also there, but also because it will become more efficient and cheaper. So long term, I think the need for natural resources, particularly from Russia, which are mostly fossil fuels, will decline. So that would be, I think, a first strong argument for the weakening of this relationship, because the need from China might actually be less than people consider currently. Then in the short term, of course, you have the issue that Russia needs China because of sanctions, etc., not only China, but other countries. But of course, again, the question you may ask is whether China will be willing to strengthen a relationship, at least openly. If it is, it might be ultimately subject to sanctions itself by cooperating more with Russia, not to mention that it would attract even more attention to its own human rights problems at home. So that would be my second argument. And then a third argument, which is less economic and more strategic. I think one of the biggest success of China, and with this I end, is that it actually is a super well-functioning economy, but an autocracy. And the reason why it becomes, or it has become, an example for so many autocracies all over the world is that actually it is an economic success. Now, what does it gain from having a very deep relationship with an economic failure, such as Russia? So from a political perspective, I think it probably would be to shoot themselves in the foot as well there. Having said this is an interesting and completely open question, but I would say that there are quite compelling arguments for the relationship to weaken, despite what it looks like at first view.
Thank you, Ines, for that intervention. And for additional arguments to support the team. And José Miguel will support the stronger team.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the IEP for the invitation. Greetings to the students and their interventions, and to my fellow colleagues in the panel. I will divide my short intervention into two parts. The first one is to address what the students have just presented. I would like the weak team to put forward some more arguments on the supposed opposing strategies between China and Russia, and to make the point that they don't need to be friends. They only have to be tacit allies, and Ukraine is the occasion to do that. Different ideologies do not produce necessarily different points of view. On the strengthening team, which I'm aligned with for the arguments of Maya and Fan, history, and you are talking to my heart, of course, history is a very important argument, but you should perhaps substantiate a little bit more on that history importance to focus on the relationship between China and Russia. And the argument that money talks calls for an explanation, because it can be used by either side. Partnership can weaken because of economic reasons, as Professor Inês Domingues has put it, and I agree with her, but the way money talks can also strengthen the partnership. Why do I think, coming to my second part of the intervention, to substantiate some of the arguments that the strengthened team has put forward, why do I think that the partnership in the short term and in the long term will strengthen? Because Russia and China have much more in common than those aspects that put them apart. Even before the Ukrainian war of 2022, and that is an argument to be analyzed through history, they both have strong authoritarian leaderships, but they are both regimes that are eagerly revisionists. Putin, in the sense that he wants, through his national interest or imperialism, to counter what he has already called the tragedy of 1991 and the loss of the imperial outlook of former Soviet Union, now Russia. And Xi Jinping is all about nationalism and righting the wrongs of what Chinese call the century of humiliation. They both have a perceived despise for the West. They despise democratic procedures. They both view USA as their primary strategic threat. And ever since 2012, and please remember how Xi Jinping reacted to the Crimean invasion in 2014, 8 years ago, when the true Ukrainian war started. This is only the second part in 2022. The relationship has been growing stronger. Collaboration in defense, joint military exercises, arms sale, technical cooperation, economic ties. China's share of Russia external trade has gone from 10% to 20% in the last 8 years, and the support of Xi Jinping, of President Xi, to the invasion of Crimea in 2014. They have just announced their no-limits partnership, and although I support that the partnership will strengthen, there is a but. And the but is the scenery in which Russia escalates, let's hope it doesn't happen, to the use of chemical or nuclear weapons in Ukraine or elsewhere. The Baltic is becoming the new Balkans of the 21st century. Let's hope Putin is reasonable enough not to go there, because that is the flaw in the strengthening argument. China doesn't want to look in the international scenario as a pure maverick. China has responsibilities. China acts globally. Xi Jinping is a much more reliable leader than Vladimir Putin. And so if Putin exceeds in the violence of war, that is perhaps the only element that will force President Xi to put in the balance the economic perspectives of China and the way they want to look responsible and the way Putin goes from a potential ally to a problem for the future of China. But all in all, I should stand with Maya, with Ramesses, and with Fan, because I do think that their no limits partnership is going to stand for the years to come after Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, José Miguel, for this enlightening intervention and your strong support of your team. We now open it up to the audience, and this is the audience of liberalism, so you can either make a contribution analyzing the situation, give the students food for thought, which they need to take into consideration, or you can ask them specific questions. You can also say, well, your argument, I wasn't convinced, and so on. You're totally free to express yourself and contributing to the debate, asking the students, trying to attack or support them. So I open it up to the audience. Who wants to contribute to the debate, to everything we have heard? We have, there is the first. And please introduce yourself to the audience so that we know roughly which institution you represent.
Good morning. My name is Yannick van Herenveld. I'm an Erasmus student from the Netherlands, and I want to just make a comment. In the Cold War, we saw in the 70s that Nixon and Kissinger, they went to China, and they transformed the then bipolar world order into a multipolar world order. I have a question for both teams. I was just wondering, do you think that in 20 years or so we're going to see a Western leader either going to Moscow or again to Beijing? And do you think that the world order of the 21st century will be a bipolar one or a multipolar one? And I want to thank you all for the contributions.
I collect questions before I go back to the teams. Any other? Yes? Back there. Just way back. And please introduce yourself and then pose the question.
Good morning. My name is Antonio Carvalho. I'm from the IEP, and my question was generally around, do you believe that as it stands, as my colleague said, that the current climate that we are witnessing could escalate into a non-traditional Cold War, where certain aspects of it are not a fight for influence, but a fight for, as has been said, new warfare when it comes to technology, stealing, influencing politics in a way that hasn't really been seen in the past. There has been some inclinations of it, and it's been accused in the US politics, etc. But do you believe that perhaps such new weapon could bring forward a new type of Cold War that we have not yet witnessed?
Okay, and a third question here, and then there's, I have three back, and then I'll go back to the audience. A third question here.
Hello, my name is Lorenza. It's not a direct question, it's more of an open question, especially for the growing stronger group. You have mentioned about history, and your focus was going to be more of history and how back in the years Russia and China partnership is going. But what I think everyone wants a little bit more is how the Ukraine conflict will change international perspectives. Because you said on the long term they will continue to be partnerships, but I wanted to know especially what is going to happen, in your opinion, with the international perspectives, because I do not believe superpowers or even influential countries want to be partners with Russia, for example, that's committed a lot of war crimes. So I don't think China would benefit a lot on that partnership. So I just want for you guys to explore that a little bit more. Thank you.
Okay. I think, yes, let's take five, then, and then we go back to the students. We had one there and then one here. Okay. Back there, the question.
Good morning, everyone. I'm an IEP student, and my question is to both teams, actually. What about India there between Russia and China? Because traditionally, in economic sphere, India and China, they are rivals, they are confronting countries, but Russia tends to make, to ally to both of them. How do you think India will influence that partnership? Thank you.
Okay, and then we have a question here, and please introduce, we all know you, but please introduce.
Jim Muller, University of Alaska, Anchorage. I just wonder how each team thinks this question will be influenced by the fact that the demographic situation in Russia is a serious decline, whereas there's a very different situation in China.
So we have 5 questions, and I bring it back to the students. We have the Nixon and Kissinger went to China. Will there be another trip? Then we have the non-traditional Cold War, Ukraine, India, demographics. I think I refer first to Team Stronger to respond, and maybe not the last speaker, because we want to hear the last speaker and maybe one of the first 2 respond to questions, and then what is left over we might give to the weekend one. But let's see how it plays. So, Stronger. Yes, please. And choose your question, the one you want to respond to. And you might want to do it from there, and with the mic.
So thank you all for the insightful questions, definitely bringing a different angle and perspective to the debate that both teams we have planned and what the arguments. I'll address the first questions, which are highly interesting. Definitely based on history and current contemporary affairs, we do see a scenario for multipolar relationships. We see the demographics changing. We've heard about India, China. The entire geopolitical situation foresee that it will probably no longer be Western-led hegemony. The question of implications, what exactly will be the structure, is interesting. We definitely foresee a stronger power for China to be involved. Russia usually did not try to be the leading force. That's probably one of the reasons why they usually went aligned, that their interests did not conflict against each other. So it's a different strategy for Russia, much more through influence and being underneath the radar compared to China. So we do see a possibility for this multipolar relationships and different hegemony. To the question of non-traditional warfare, which is highly interesting, we're already seeing it. Especially in cyberspace, we are seeing the increasing cooperation in misinformation relating to the Ukraine question. We're actually seeing it in Ukraine. China is actually fostering a lot of misinformation when it comes to supporting the Russian narrative. So actually, technologically, we definitely see this Cold War. The question of can we call it a war or digital warfare, it's interesting. It's a question of many scholars. We definitely see how cyberspace and non-traditional instruments highlight this and actually increase this partnership between these 2 countries. Relating to the question about Ukraine, it is important, we definitely agree. We just feel that sometimes when we are over-focusing on Ukraine, it takes a bit from the history of both countries. We can see how actually China chose not to go against Russia in this conflict, in the sense that we can see it in the UN Security Councils, we're seeing it also in the public statements, and more interestingly, we are seeing it outside of the media. We are seeing it in the misinformation, we are seeing it in the hidden meetings, and even interesting statements of Chinese officials saying that this is an unlimited friendship, a statement which we're not usually seeing between other liberal actors. So we do believe that this war will grow this relationship much stronger. And yes, that's, I believe, conclude most of the questions.
Team Weekend. Respond. Please respond to the questions that were posed from the audience.
Is this on? Okay. Good morning. I will respond first to the response of the other group that I believe that history matters. I just don't agree with the way you presented your arguments. If I would argument with history, I would argument in other way. And history matters, and responding to the question about Ukraine, I think history was made, and history was made that changed everything, and we have to consider it in that way. And to the first question about if it's going to be a bipolar or multipolar order, I believe it is going to be a multipolar order because in the Cold War, what we had was the United States and Russia with a lot of its allies that were completely subordinated to the Soviet ideology, to everything. And the relationship between Russia and China was always imbalanced. Russia, at the beginning, had the bigger hands, but now it's China with the bigger hands. Was always an imbalanced relationship. And China will not subordinate to Russia. And I believe that Russia will not subordinate to China either. So that's why I believe it will be a multipolar order and will not have a bipolar order anymore. And I leave the other questions to my next colleague to respond in his argument. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for all this input. The third speakers are warming up and we are looking forward to the final statements. But I can say to these students, you have additional support because your experts on each side will give a minute statement of support before you take back the floor. We start this time with Stronger. José Miguel,
yes.
For your team.
Thank you very much for my team. And it's going to be Ramesses to take the floor. Would you be able to squeeze into your arguments two variables that have not been talked about, which is in the equation Russia-China, we also have to look into the United States and Europe, and especially what kind of United States is going to act globally after the coming 2024 election. And the other scenery you should perhaps address is the different situation of Vladimir Putin winning the war or Vladimir Putin losing the war. Because I submit, and I don't know whether Ramesses will agree or will want to take this argument on, if Vladimir Putin loses, scenery A, if Vladimir Putin wins the war, this will triumphantly reinforce what is called the authoritarian challenge that we are dealing with in this encounter in Yashtaril. And if Vladimir Putin loses the war, he will become more dependent on the only regime akin to it to act globally, which is Xi Jinping's China. If you want to pick up this argument, feel free to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for that support and that homework. Ines, for your team.
For my team, thank you. It's just very quick, and I think it boils down much to what has been said. When we talk about the question is whether the relationship will weaken or deepen. So the question I ask the team I support to possibly consider is whether the fact that two countries are closer together because one of them is hugely dependent on the other, does that mean that it's it may be a closer relationship, but is it a deeper fruitful relationship for the purposes of that it wants to serve? So I would like to, it's a bit off question, I understand, but it might be also helpful to consider whether such a relationship, even if closer, might not be deeper, because if one country is totally dependent on the other, that it becomes useless to some extent. So there you are, thank you.
So thank you for that final input, and now we're waiting for the closing statements of the final speakers of both teams. I call on Julian to make the case for weekend.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. So, my esteemed colleagues from the proposition team have submitted a lot of flowery rhetoric. They've talked a lot about arguments from history, but provided very few specific examples. They've mentioned the importance of economic interest and that money talks, but once again have submitted few specific examples. And also, more importantly, they've been cherry picking. So my colleague from the proposition had mentioned about how treaties can go terribly wrong historically, and had submitted the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact as an example. My question is why then, why not look at the history of treaties going wrong between China and Russia? There's plenty of examples of that. So, I mean, Qing Dynasty China and Tsarist Russia had the Treaty of Nerchinsk to sort of regulate trade, but that eventually did not stop Tsarist Russia from annexing territories in the Far East from Qing Dynasty China as Russia expanded eastward. China and Russia had the Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship. It was a pretty comprehensive treaty. And China provided some resources, some mineral resources to Russia, to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union provided technical assistance and other aid to China as it recovered from the Second World War. But that, again, it still ultimately fell apart. And currently, they don't even have a treaty. They just have some sort of a statement. And, okay, taken.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned they don't even have treaty right now. I just want to ask, like, do you think alliance should be proved through pieces of papers, agreements, or treaties? And what if you can't see the agreements? And actually how effective treaties or agreements can be?
Thank you for the question. No, I don't think that alliances necessarily need to be proven by treaties, but my point is that treaties generally are considered to be stronger and more binding than just statements in international relations. And yet, even with treaties, that did not prevent Russia and China from falling out, because like our argument is also that their fundamental core interests are not aligned. So they will diverge over the long term. They both seek primacy over Eurasia. And geography is what it is. They are neighbors. And historically, as both have expanded, they've run up against each other. And likely they will run up against each other again, as they both have, once again, expansionist ideologies and worldviews. And just with regards to the economic dimension, it's not as significant as the proposition has made it seem. Because yes, while the economic ties have grown, Russia is still not yet among China's top 5 trading partners. The EU is still the second largest trading partner. The US is still China's third largest trading partner. And actually in 2021, China-EU trade grew by 19.1% and China-US trade grew by 20.2%. So, I mean, China is certainly not ideologically aligned with the US and the EU, but as my colleague said, money talks, and in this case, money definitely talks. And also in the long run, Russia has experienced decades of economic stagnation since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And there is just not much of a consumer market there to be attractive for China to want to grow its trade with Russia, and there's just not much of a capacity for growth in trade. And as has already been mentioned, right now China might need some fossil fuel resources from Russia, but China is ambitiously pursuing energy transition, and over the long term, it will need these fossil fuel resources less. And also the Chinese government and leadership are very acutely concerned about not becoming overly dependent on any one country and any one destination. So it's unlikely that they will be as dependent on Russia as the EU ended up becoming dependent on Russia for energy resources. And also given the historical misgivings and suspicions and breaks between China and Russia, this is also why China and Russia haven't had a very deep energy relationship in recent times. POI?
Just last minute, you decide whether it's yours
or
no,
hers. No. Sorry. So my concluding statements are that the China-Russia partnership will eventually weaken because their fundamental interests are not aligned. There is currently some temporary convergence of interest. We've seen this before in different times in the past between Qing Dynasty China and Tsarist Russia, between the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, but ultimately they split up because their fundamental geopolitical interests are not aligned. Geography is what it is, history is what it is, and we've heard a lot at this conference about the burden of history and to some degree the burden of geography, and I submit that this will cause them to eventually grow apart. And one final word, the Chinese have a saying, 一山不容二虎, so Eurasia cannot, one mountain cannot contain two tigers, so Eurasia cannot contain two leading powers. Thank you.
The third speaker from Team Stronger, Ramses.
Now, esteemed Chair, dear audience, thank you for having me here. Now, I'd first of all like to start off by responding to some of the points made by Mr. Sardica here on the expert panel. More specifically, the position of the United States and Europe in this algorithm that is international relations, and more specifically, the relations between China and Russia. Now, one could of course argue that the United States and Europe and the entire liberal order will put pressure on China to dissociate itself or to move away from Russia. But in fact, what we have to consider is the fact that the liberal international order has weakened over the past decade. You've got the European Union, which has lost its second largest economy in the past few years. You've got the United States, which a few years ago was against not only further European integration, but even cast it out as to whether or not NATO could expand, or whether or not it would even protect existing NATO members. And you've got populists in many Western countries who have, in their own words, undermined the foundations of the Western international liberal order. So in fact, is that a point of information? Oh, no, we don't accept that, sorry. We don't have the time. We don't have the time. Right, well... No. Well, the other side didn't accept one of our POIs. I mean, I don't know, do we have to?
Information you have to take.
We have to take.
But it has to be information. It can't be the same speech.
Well, please, no.
Could you please re-clarify what you mean by the US no longer being interested in NATO? Because surely that's changed in recent...
No. The example I was giving, and I think I made this pretty clear, is that in the past few years, the United States had mentioned that it didn't want further NATO integration, but that was under Trump, and that was pretty obvious as far as I'm concerned. Now, regarding the war in Ukraine and what China's position to that could be, depending on whether or not Russia wins or loses. Now, what we've seen is that trade between Russia and China has actually grown not only since 2014, but also since the war in Ukraine in 2021. It's gone up by 50% since 2014, and by 35.9%, this is according to the Chinese Customs Office, since 2021. So in fact, we would argue that the result of the war with respect to relations specifically between Russia and China, the outcome of the war is largely irrelevant, and we see this through the fact that China has remained pretty much neutral in this war. Now, of course, the outcome of the war may affect how Russia is seen, in particular in Eastern Europe, but China will, as far as we are concerned, continue trading and continue interacting with Russia. And another point we would like to make is the fact that in terms of Chinese and Russian relations with third parties, with third countries, they largely complement each other rather than competing. If you look at Africa, we heard today this idea of the scramble for Africa. Well, in fact, if you look at Africa, you see that Russia is investing in paramilitary groups, in particular Wagner, even though that's in theory a private military group, but that's a different story, whereas China is investing in economic development in these countries across the whole of East Africa. And even if you look at the Russian state, to take the example of Egypt, for instance, Russia has provided weapons to Egypt, whereas China has part-financed the Suez Canal, the second branch of the Suez Canal. And you see this all over Africa, mainly East Africa, because that's part of the One Belt, One Road program. But you do see this everywhere. You see it in Southeast Asia as well. There's no true competition between China and Russia for influence in Southeast Asia. And as far as we're concerned, this just shows that the Russia-China relations will continue growing stronger. Yeah, we saw that. And the final point we would like to make is the fact that these countries, although they are portrayed as belligerent, not very friendly towards others, all they seek in the long term, especially with respect to each other, is friendly relations with all countries. In fact, they respect each other's territorial integrity. The other countries may not appreciate this, but all they want is economic investment with each other, with the entire world. Is that, no, right? And as stated on the 50p coin released by the British government to commemorate Brexit, all they want is peace, prosperity, and friendship with all nations. Thank you.
Thank you for a fascinating debate, and we all benefited from it, and there's no winner, there's no loser, because the enjoyment of the engagement, the students with the subject, the audience, and so on, that deserves applause from everyone. But since we're all footballers at heart, you want to know who's a winner and a loser in this debate. And the audience has changed from when we first asked the question to the second. So my friends from the Social Sciences Method Department will disapprove what we're doing now, but we will ask the question again. Do you think the relationship will grow stronger or will become weaker? We had a result at the beginning. Let's see what we have now. So just who thinks this relationship will grow stronger? Leave it to them. Yes? Rough, what? Over 80, okay. Who thinks it will weaken? No, just count. We're at 40, so the audience has grown by about 20. Each side has won 10.
Well done.
I don't like draws. I think it was going towards stronger. It stays stronger. I know some people who changed their minds. And we have, let's hear the people who changed their mind from which side to another. It's 2-2, so it looks a little bit like a draw, but let's hear why you changed your mind and which argument actually turned you around. Let's hear those people.
Please raise your hands again, the ones that changed their mind.
You changed your mind from...
Well, I didn't, is not really, because I was abstinent because both sides were very strong, although I was leaning towards the stronger in the beginning. The issue here was more not on the theme itself, but on the debate teams. I feel like the getting weaker made more compelling arguments. And not that they didn't make compelling arguments, but they made very few arguments that they either failed to back up or were petty about some arguments. Now,
You're getting grades now.
But, you know, both teams did well, although I feel like the weaker did better, and that surely did influence my voting right now.
We have a statement, the weaker did better. Do we have others who changed their mind the other way around?
Same way here.
Same way, from stronger to weaker? Same here. So weaker won, yeah. Give us that argument and then I close it. From weaker to stronger?
I wasn't aware of the position that China had after the annexation of Crimea in 2014. And if the relationships grew stronger between Russia and China then I wasn't aware of that. So why would it be different now, since this is an evolution of the annexation of Crimea and not exactly a separate event? So that's why I changed my mind.
Well done. So thank you very much. The traditional way in Oxford would be the stronger has won because the audience was stronger, but we are not that traditional. I call it a draw because both sides changed some opinions, both put good arguments forward, and I settled for a draw. But Team Stronger can consider themselves the winners if they want to, because the traditional ones is you have by far the majority on the audience on your side. So for those who put it on their CV, you can say a draw, or you can say, clearly we won. Clearly we won. The tradition would say the winner is stronger. So for those who stick with the rules, the winner are the stronger ones. But I think the arguments made in favor of the weaker team changing minds were very, very convincing as well. So congratulating to both teams.